Hello. Hello, everybody. The topic of my today's video is power. Power in context of leadership. This is a very important topic. I would say that this is probably one of the most important topics that I will discuss this semester. Not that the other topics that I will discuss are not important. Let me put it this way. 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if you have forgotten everything else that I taught over the semester, but fully remembered the power chapter and have incorporated those lessons into your life, you will still be a very effective leader. So that's why I'm saying this is a very important topic. This is also a very huge topic. There's a lot of research that has been done on the topic of power. We could spend one entire semester talking only about power. Of course, we don't have that luxury. But I will discuss power in a fairly comprehensive fashion, which should give you an idea about what power is and what its relevance is to leadership and how you could incorporate some of the lessons from the concept of power in order to be effective as leaders. I did a Google image search for powerful people, and this is what I got in terms of results. So we see several familiar figures. We see Donald Trump, we see the president of China, Xi Jinping, we see Vladimir Putin from Russia, we see Angela Merkel from Germany, we see the Pope, we also see Dalai Lama, so we see some political and spiritual leaders both. We see some business leaders as well. We see Bill Gates here, we see Mark Zuckerberg and Apple's CEO. We see Ambani from India, who is one of the billionaires, Jeff Bezos, and so on and so forth. So we see people from the field of politics, from spirituality, and business. We see some past leaders like Barack Obama as well, and we see some survey results of top business leaders. And in there we see Narendra Modi as well in both the results, who is the Prime Minister of India. We see him here as well. In any case, the point is, when we think of power, even when Google thinks of power, it thinks of top leaders, very powerful people. Now, what implication does this have with respect to the concept of power? I think the results that I got in my Google image search is also a reflection of how most of us, most common folks, see power. Most common people see power as something that is only restricted to the top 1% of the population. It's the top 1% of the population who only have power. The rest are nothing but slaves. And this is a problem with respect to how most common people view power. They see power as something that is evil. Now, if you don't have power, or if you feel you don't have power, then you feel helpless. And when you feel helpless, then you start thinking of the powerful people as evil. In fact, if you read many newspapers, well, I wouldn't say all, but at least most newspapers tend to often depict powerful people as also something who are evil. We see the evil depiction here also in form of this 666 number and Antichrist and so on and so forth. So power is often associated as dominating over others. And if you are really amongst the top 1% or 0.1% of the world's population who have the money and the political power, then you are trying to dominate over the entire world. That's the perception that most people have about power, which is very negative, but that seems to be what many people believe what power is. Now, that is a problem. Why? There are many problems, but one of the major problems would be that it divides the population into two categories: those who have power and those without power. Those who have power end up being seen as evil people, and those without power are seen as weak. No one likes to be dominated over. No one likes to be seen as weak, right? So it's no wonder that we end up with this perceptual dichotomy when we view power as a form of dominating others. So in the field of organizational leadership, we don't view power in such negative terms, although this is a view that is entertained by certain fields, certain studies, but I won't go there. So how do we view power in my field of organizational behavior or organizational leadership? This is how we define power. We define power as the capacity of one party to influence another party. In other words, power is the capacity to influence others to attain some agreed upon goal, to attain some common goal. That's all power is. It's the capacity to influence. You can contrast this with the definition of leadership that you had seen in one of my previous videos. How did we define leadership? We had defined leadership as the process of influencing others to attain some common goal. So the only difference between leadership and power is that power is the capacity to influence, whereas leadership is the process of influencing others. That's it. So it's not just a matter of semantics, by the way. This distinction between power and leadership has a lot of significance, a lot of practical significance. You all want to be leaders, and you all want to be effective leaders. But you can be effective as a leader only when you have the capacity to influence others. If you do not have the capacity to influence others, how are you going to influence people? In other words, at least if we talk about it in theoretical terms, if you have zero capacity to influence people, there can be no leadership from you, right? You have to have some capacity to influence people to be able to influence people. So power is a very important concept when we are discussing leadership. When you want to become effective leaders, essentially you are aiming at becoming more powerful. In other words, you are aiming at developing those capacities that is going to make you more influential. And it is not just organizational leadership where power is defined in neutral terms. If you take a look at the field of physics, even there you see it being defined in very neutral terms. In physics, there is no moral power or immoral power. So power is neither moral or evil. Of course, this is not a class in physics, so we won't spend too much time here, but I will quickly touch upon how power is conceptualized in physics and try to see the parallels and the benefit of viewing power in non-negative terms. So how do we see power in physics? One of the definitions is it's the work done per unit time. So if you can haul, let's say, 1,000 bricks per in a matter of hour, then you would be more powerful than a person who can haul only 100 bricks, right? So because you are getting more work done within that hour, so you are more powerful. In case of a light bulb, a bulb that say emits 100 lumens of light per second is more powerful than a light bulb that emits only 10 lumens of light per second. Yes? So that's one of the definitions of power. Another definition is force times velocity. Velocity, if you remember your high school physics class, it is essentially speed in a certain direction. So speed along with direction becomes velocity. So a muscle car like Maserati or Ferrari would be considered more powerful than, say, a Toyota Corolla, right? Because those cars can go much faster than a Corolla. If we think in terms of pulling power, a truck can pull more weight than what a Corolla can pull, right? So it can pull with a greater force, greater torque. But anyway, that's going into technicalities. So what we are seeing here is that there is nothing positive or negative about power in physics. If at all there is something positive, right? Because we would all like to have a powerful car, a powerful light bulb, a powerful person. Now we may not need the we may not need to use that powerful car all the time. If I have a Maserati, I can, of course, if I wish to, I can drive it slow, but I can also drive it fast when there's a need for it, if I want to, right? But if I have a Corolla, then I can drive it only at the speed that it can go. I cannot reach the kind of speeds that a Ferrari can, right? Or I cannot use it to pull haul some heavy weight, which a truck can. So ideally, we would like to have power. So that is how we view power also in the field of organizational leadership. Power is not a dirty word. Power is not something bad. Power is a dirty word only for those who don't have power, or who don't believe, or who believe that they don't have power. So don't view power as something that is bad. Power can be of great help to you if you want to be effective leaders. And we will discuss how you can then gain power. Now, if power is the capacity to influence people, where do you get that capacity from? How can you develop that capacity to influence people? That was the question that French and Raven asked way back in the 1950s. Their first model identified 5 factors: reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, expert power, and referent power. These were the 5 major sources from which managers got their power, or their capacity to influence people, the capacity to influence their subordinates. In the 60s, in their revised model, they added one more dimension. Everything else was same, and that dimension was information power. So together, these 6 factors contribute to the power that a manager has. Two things that I would like to touch upon. Even though this model is fairly old, several decades old, this still provides some great insights about power and how to develop it. And the second point is that this model may talk about managerial power, but its application is not only restricted to managerial situations or organizational situations. In fact, you could apply this knowledge to your personal lives or to other situations wherever you are interacting with people, or for that matter, even with animals to a certain extent. If you apply these principles, then you will be more influential with them. Okay, so this is a great model to gain insights about how to become more powerful. So what are these factors and what do they exactly mean? That's what we will discuss next. Those 6 sources of power that French and Raven talked about could be broadly divided into 2 categories: position power and personal power. We have 4 different sources of positional power: legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, and informational power. All these sources come from the position that the person occupies. So the capacity to influence people is coming from the position that the person is having. In contrast, when we are talking about expert power and referent power, these capacities to influence people comes from factors within the person. So that is the reason they are called personal power. Now we will discuss how you can enhance your capacity to influence people, because that's how we define power, right? In other words, how can you be more powerful? We will start with the positional basis of power. One of the positional basis of power was reward power. What is reward power? Do you have the ability to reward people? In other words, do you have the ability to give people something that they value, something that they want, something that they love, something that they find pleasurable, something that they find desirable? Then you have reward power over them. In organizational context, because again, French and Raven's model was in organizational context, managers typically have that reward power. They can give a raise to their subordinate. They can give a higher bonus or a lower bonus. They can promote their subordinate, recommend them for promotion. All these powers are coming from the position that they have, right? Because this person X is in a position of manager or whatever seniority, that's the reason he or she is being able to give rewards to people based on, of course, their performance or whatever other factor that the manager deems fit. But manager is deriving power, or people are willing to follow the manager because this person has the capacity to reward them. So this is an important way to enhance your power. Figure out ways through which you can reward people. As I was telling you before, this extends beyond the workplace, even in personal relationships, for instance, or your relationship with your friends, and in anywhere you are interacting with people. Can you reward them? Reward doesn't have to be in terms of money. In intimate relationships, personal relationships, for instance, rewards happen in form of attention, in form of access to sexual relations, in form of delicious food. So if your partner wants something very badly and you can provide that to your partner, then you have reward power over your partner. Okay, so the person would be willing to follow you, would be willing to do things for you because you can provide something that the person finds valuable, that the person desires. So that is what we mean by reward power. The next one is coercive power. Coercive power is very similar to reward power, except that it is discussed in context of punishments or things that people find undesirable. So if you can provide some unpleasant consequence to people, something that they find aversive, then you have coercive power over them. If you can fire people, and I don't want to get fired because my income, my livelihood is dependent upon it, then my manager, my boss will have coercive power over me, right? So same thing, this will also extend beyond organizations. If you can punish, it could apply even to your pet, right? If you punish your dog for not following your directions, if you can punish, then you have coercive power over your dog. If you can give a treat and the dog really loves the treat, then you have reward power over your dog. So reward power, coercive power, pretty much same thing, but one applies to rewards, other one applies to punishments. And in organizational context, typically we describe them as positional power because in organizations, at least, it's only people in positions of authority who have the capacity to reward, who have the capacity to punish. If you are not in a position of authority, then typically you won't be able to reward or punish in organizations. Nonetheless, you realize that having the capacity to reward people and having the capacity to punish people enhances your capacity to influence them. Now, this does not mean that the people who you are influencing are powerless, right? Compared to, especially if we relate this with the initial discussion that we had about the definition of power, domination versus capacity to influence. Because if what you can reward is not something that the person desires, then you will not have reward power over that person. Let's say I am a millionaire, okay? I'm just working for the experience or just to have fun, just to spend some time, okay? Then you having the capacity to give me a raise will not enhance your power because I'm already a millionaire, right? I'm already a billionaire. So you have the capacity to give me a raise. You sure have that capacity, but you have no power over me because I don't need that money. I already have the money. Following me? So when we are talking about rewards and punishments, we always need to think in context of whether it is rewarding to the other person or whether that consequence is aversive to the other person. So even if you can give so-called rewards, even if you can give so-called punishments, you will not have reward power or coercive power if those consequences are not desirable to the person, or if those persons are not something that they find aversive. I already have another job in waiting, okay? And you threaten that you will fire me if I don't finish certain job. You don't have coercive power over me because I have several other options, right? So anyway, but if you can provide things that others find desirable, that others find aversive, then you will have reward power and coercive power. And these are two common methods of enhancing your power, enhancing your capacity to influence people. Now let's come to the next one. Legitimate power. Legitimate power is the power that comes from the rank that you have, the title that your position has. Okay, so when the rank that you have or the title that you have gives you a sense of legitimacy to lead, or gives you a sense of legitimacy about your expertise, then people will be more willing to follow you. Clear? For example, in a business organization, the CEO of the company will have more legitimate power than, say, let's say an assistant manager within the same company, right? Assistant manager is a leader responsible for people, but he's at a lower level, whereas the CEO is at a much higher level, much higher rank. So the CEO has more legitimate power than this assistant manager that we are talking about. And the difference is not just because of the number of people working under these people, right? Of course, there will be fewer people working under the assistant manager compared to the CEO, where everyone in the organization would be essentially directly or indirectly working under this person. The differences in legitimate power would also translate to outside the organization. For example, if I were to invite a speaker and you have to pay money to listen to the speaker, whom would you be more excited to listen to? Whom would you be willing to pay more for to listen to? The CEO of the company or an assistant manager within the same company? I think most of you would say that it's going to be the CEO, right? If that's all you know, if you know nothing else. One person, one of the speakers is a CEO, other person is an assistant manager working within a small department of the huge company. Of course, you will be going to the room where the CEO is doing the presentation, and maybe even willing to pay more to listen to that presentation as opposed to the assistant manager. Even though it is possible that the assistant manager may be talking about something that you may find more interesting, right? But the CEO gives a sense of legitimacy that the lower rank holder does not have. Similar things can happen also with respect to educational qualifications. For example, you would be willing to pay more to listen to a person who has, say, a PhD in chemistry. Let's say chemistry is what you are interested in, and we have two speakers. One is a person who has a PhD in chemistry. The second person has an undergrad degree in chemistry. You will of course go for the person who has a PhD degree in chemistry, right? Because that person has more legitimate power. His PhD degree gives him the legitimacy to speak about chemistry that the undergrad degree holder does not have. Even though it is possible that the undergrad degree may actually be a um, more knowledgeable person, right? Like, for example, that movie by Matt Damon, Good Will Hunting, right? Matt Damon, I think, was a janitor in that movie. So he doesn't have power. He doesn't have legitimate power. He is one of the lowest ranked person within the university. I think it was in Harvard or MIT, wherever that movie was picturized or depicted. So it is possible that a lower ranked person may actually not may actually be a bigger expert than a higher ranked person, but not knowing any of those details, you will go for the person who has a higher rank, who has the title. That's what we mean by legitimate power. It gives you an authority to speak about things. It gives you an authority, a sense of legitimacy, due to which people will be much more willing to follow you. The last positional basis of power is information power. This is the power that comes to you if you are privy to information that others, again similar to reward power, want, that others find valuable, okay, and but you are privy to that information because of being in certain position. A good example of this would be, say, a clerk in an organization, some kind of administrative assistant in an organization. Now, in terms of hierarchical authority, in terms of legitimate power, the vice president of the company will have more legitimate power than the administrative assistant, right? Because administrative assistant is not a leadership position. Clear? But if the administrative assistant is working under the CEO of the company, just an example, okay, then by virtue of the administrative assistant working under the CEO or the CFO of the company, he or she may be privy to a lot of information that the managers may want, that people may want. And in that case, then the administrative assistant will have more information power than the managers or some other vice presidents who are not privy to that information but want that information. Clear? Now, as I was mentioning, all, at least most of these sources of power extend beyond workplace as well, right? So in context of information power, this could apply, for instance, to gossip. A lot of gossip is related to information power. If I have some juicy details about you that others want to know about, okay, what's that movie? I know what you did last summer or something. I haven't seen the movie, but the title of the movie. So I know something secret about you that others want to know about. Now I have information power. I can influence them, all those people who want that information about you. I can influence them, right? So that is an example of information power. So hope you are seeing how you can enhance your capacity to influence people by increasing your ability to reward people or increasing your capacity to punish people, getting high ranks, or getting access to information that others people value. Now we will discuss the personal basis of power. Now you can also enhance your capacity to influence people by working on your own self. Because when we are talking about personal basis of power, we are talking about factors within yourself. When we talked about positional basis of power, it's about acquiring positions so that you can reward people, punish people, or have a rank that then gives you the legitimacy to lead people or gives you information that others find valuable. You acquire positions of power to be more influential. When we are talking about personal basis of power, in contrast, we are talking about developing our own selves so that more people would be willing to follow us. That's what we mean by personal basis of power. So here we have just two broad categories. One is expert power, which is pretty simple, straightforward, as the term denotes. An expert is a person who is very competent, who is very knowledgeable, who is skillful in what he or she does, right? So the greater the expertise that you have, the more competent you are in your field of study, in your field of work, the more people will be willing to follow you. Simple, straightforward. Going back to that example of Matt Damon's movie of Good Will Hunting, in that movie he was a janitor. Janitor does not have any legitimate power, right? He does not even have any of those degrees, high degrees that others had in that movie. People working at MIT or Harvard, wherever the movie was situated. He didn't have any of those legitimate power, but he had the expert power. He was extremely competent as a mathematician. He had the knowledge. That's the reason ultimately he succeeded in influencing people, right? So that's what we mean by expert power. So, by the way, people often confuse between expert power and information power. So I must touch upon that as well. Remember, information power is a positional basis of power. The person may not necessarily be an expert. In position power, the person is just in the right place at the right time. And because of that, he got access to some information that others want. And that's how the person is gaining power. But in case of expert power, it's not about just having some access to some information. It's actually having the knowledge. It's really understanding things. It's really, if we talk in terms of skills, it's really having the skills to, let's say, operate some machinery. Or it could be skills related to art or whatever the topic area, your area. So that's what we are talking about when we are talking about expert power. If you are a real expert in your field, then people will be respecting you and people will be willing to follow you. The last one is called referent power. And when we are talking about referent power, we are talking about the power that comes from having a magnetic kind of personality. It's about not just personality, it could also be personal or physical features that make you very attractive, that make you very likable, very lovable person, that make you a very admirable kind of person. We all like to or would be willing to do things for the people whom we love, the people whom we admire, right? So that's where referent power comes in play. Referent power would be having that kind of magnetic, that kind of charismatic personality. So, for example, if you are a tall, dark, handsome guy, then probably more people would be willing to follow you than somebody else who is, let's say, an obese individual. Okay, that is referent power. Now, it's coming from just the physical personality. But we can talk about the psychological aspects of the personality as well, in terms of how the person speaks, the charisma. Uh, so you may be a physically, not very attractive person, but do you have the personality then? A very attractive, charismatic personality. If so, then you will have more people willing to follow you. That's what we are referring to as referent power. So I will stop my video here with this slide, but I have a question for all of you that I want you to think about and answer before you watch the second part of the video that I will make on the topic of power. I didn't want each video to be too long. That's the reason I'm stopping the video here. So we talked about 6 different sources of power, 6 different sources from which you can enhance your capacity to influence. Now, which of these 6 capacities is the most powerful? In other words, which of these sources of power, legitimate, expert, coercive, information, expert, referent, will have a greater impact, greater positive impact when it comes to influencing people? And which do you think will have the least impact? Can you rank order these sources of power? That's what I want you to do. Now, before you watch the second part of the video, think about it and make a rank order. Only then go and watch the second video. Thank you.